Sometimes, just when you realise one of your favourite albums is turning 10 years old, an album that filled your teenage youth with serious tones and slickness, you find out another album which filled your 17-year-old angst is also turning 10 years old as well. And you look in the mirror and you cry, wondering where time has gone, and why every album you loved as a teenager is now a decade old. God, why? Yes, that's correct. This year we've seen the 1975's debut album, The 1975, turn 10 years old, and what a ride it's been, eh? To celebrate, Matty Healy and the gang performed their debut album in full whilst headlining Reading and Leeds Festival, and noted how funny it was that many people in the crowd who were there looked like they would have been about 6 years old when the album originally came out. And there's nothing quite like the cyclical nature of music picking up new fans to make you realise you and your favourite bands aren't quite the new hot thing anymore, and then I cry a little on the inside. And alongside this, on September 1st, the 1975 are reissuing or re-releasing, whichever floats your boat, a 10th anniversary edition of their debut album, The 1975, on various formats with bundles of your favourite kind of merch, alongside the full live performance of their debut at Gorilla in Manchester from earlier in this year. So yeah, it's fair to say that they're definitely taking note of the album being out for a decade now. And among such celebrations, it made me think of the ways in which my relationship with this album has changed over the years. From hearing it as an angsty teenager, through to now hearing it as a miserable indie boy in his late 20s. I think it's interesting to look back at the release of this album, as for me personally it wasn't a big hit or didn't settle in straight away. Although I did like the more prolific songs such as Chocolate and Girls. Ironically, two things which certainly affected and plagued my social awkwardness as a teenager. But eventually the album did fully capture my interest, which began this decade cycle of enjoying the 1975's music, as well as staying up to date with Matty Healy's latest cancellation. Taking a look at the track list, it definitely reminds me of how this album really does fit that coming of age vibe, which probably works best when you're around 15, 16, 17, and likely explains why I don't feel connected to the album in the same way as I did back when everything seemed so serious and intense, in reflection of my relationships with my friends or my romantic partners. But alas, I can still revisit this album and enjoy it a lot, and songs such as Chocolate, Girls, Heart Out and Robbers still do feel pretty relevant in the sense of it doesn't take me back to being 17, and I can enjoy the songs but not purely because of nostalgia, just because of the good tunes. And to be honest, a lot of these songs do remain stuck in my head, tormenting me for the past 10 years. I mean, I can't say the word city without compulsively screaming, "If you wanna fall off and you know the city." However, I suppose for me that's kind of the issue I have with this album, and it's a personal note that will probably depend on your age in some ways, or the point at which you found out about the 1975. I still think it's a great album, one that I enjoy a lot when I do listen to it, but I just don't really feel drawn to it anymore, and that's probably a healthy thing, as it feels reliant upon those emotions I did in my teenage years, which naturally I've outgrown. So in a lot of ways, returning to this album feels more like a nice trip down memory lane, similar to looking at old photos. And I think that's due to a lot of the songs feeling intrinsically quite naive in many ways, which makes sense, but also translates heavily into the music I find. And that means it's insanely geared towards being a teenager. Again, not an issue, just a reflection of how time passes dependent on age for certain albums. For example, the themes of Arctic Monkeys' debut album is about those early adult years of when you turn 18, start to go on banging nights out, alongside the issues you have in romantic relationships and with family members. Now that might sound familiar for a debut album, as those themes are pretty much the same building block themes in the 1975. But the difference is the core naivety of these themes doesn't seep into the music of Arctic Monkeys' debut, and as a result feels translatable for a lot of different stages of my life, where I can enjoy the music without feeling like I'm watching Young, Dazed and Confused. Now, that's not to say that allowing themes to soak into your music and rely dependent upon those emotions is a bad thing, and it's likely that there is something in the way which these themes soak into the music of the 1975's debut, which is why it's so great and made it fantastic in the first place, and ultimately secured the 1975 as one of my favourite bands for the past 10 years. I also don't resent the way in which the album does feel like a trip down memory lane, or the fact that this is how their debut feels, as none of their other albums really hits me with the same emotion, as a result making their debut special in a way and fitting as a great trip down memory lane, similar to many other albums I grew up enjoying by other bands I love, such as Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance or Blink-182. Now, outside of the feeling for the album, one big issue people do have with their debut is they have absolutely no idea what Matty Healy is saying half of the time, and to be honest, I do agree to some extent, but it's also kind of why I love this album too, due to that completely over-the-top cursive singing style. And to be completely transparent, I only learnt in the past 2 years that in Robbers at the end, he says he's got his suit on. I literally thought he was saying he's got his cigs and look. before screaming, "You look so cool." But generally speaking for myself, I can understand what he's saying, but I completely get where people are coming from. Maybe it's because I grew up in Yorkshire where most people speak with an accent that sounds like it's from the 1500s, and my mum is from Scotland. So deciphering accents and different dialects has always been my thing. Overall though, I look back on their debut with entirely fond memories, and I do like to revisit it from time to time. And it's undoubtable that certain songs like Robbers are still absolute behemoths of a song, and it's crazy it was even on a debut album. I think it's fair to say that the 1975 have come a long way from their debut, but it's undoubtable that you can clearly trace the band's progress from step to step and album to album, and it's nice to have a starting point that feels so raw and full of emotion to go from. So do let me know how you feel reflecting on this album in the comments, and if it's one you've been with for the past decade and you're now old like me, or if you've only just discovered it, and if you'll be diving into any of their lovely celebrations for their debut. Till then, if you want to fall off and you know the city, as always, feel free to like and subscribe if you're new here. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.